Hello students, in this class we'll try to learn about lymphatic system and lymphatic circulation. The learning objectives of this class would be name components of lymphatic system of the body and give functions of lymphoid tissues, give course of circulation of lymph in the body and give composition and function of lymph. Lymphatic system. Lymphatic system consists of lymphatic vessels and lymphatic tissues. When circulating blood reaches the capillaries, part of its fluid content passes into surrounding tissue, which is called as tissue fluid. Most of these fluid re-enters the capillaries at their venous ends. Some of it is, however, returns to the circulation through a separate system of lymphatic vessels, which are called as lymphatics. The fluid passing through the lymphatic vessels is called as lymph. The smallest lymphatic vessel are lymphatic capillaries that join together to form a larger lymphatic vessels. Largest lymphatic vessel in the body is our thoracic duct, which drains lymph from the greater part of our body. The thoracic duct then ends by joining the left subclavian vein at its junction with the internal jugular vein. On the right side, uh, there is a right lymphatic duct that has a similar termination. Lymphoid tissue may be broadly classified into diffuse lymphoid tissue and dense lymphoid tissue. This is diagram showing uh, the thoracic duct where it forms a cisterna chyli at the level of L1 and L2. So then it ascends up, getting tributaries from the different parts of the body, and ultimately it terminates at the junction of left subclavian and left internal jugular vein. Lymph is a transudate from blood and contains the same proteins but the smaller amount and in different proportion. Suspended in lymph, there are cells that are called, there are chiefly lymphocytes. Most of these lymphocytes are added to the lymph as it passes through the lymph nodes, but some are derived from tissues drained by the nodes. Large molecules of fat, which are called as chylomicrons, are absorbed from the intestines and enter the lymph vessels. After a fatty meal, these fat globules may be so numerous that lymph become milky. So that is why it is called as chyle. Under these conditions, lymph vessels can be seen easily as they pass through mesentery. Coming to the anatomy, lymphatics drain lymph from different tissues of our body and empty the same into the subclavian veins at their junction with the interjugular veins. Lymphatic vessels typically begin as a blind tubular bulbs, which are called as lymphatic bulbs, that drain into meshwork of interconnected lymph vessels. For example, in intestine, the villus lacteal are lymphatic bulbs. Tissue fluid enters into the bulbs that in turn drain into interconnected lymph vessels and then from these vessels into tubular lymphatic vessels and the larger lymphatic vessels. Lymphatic vessels coalesce into increasingly larger vessels. Larger vessels are surrounded by the contractile cells similar to that of smooth muscles in the blood vessels. Lymph nodes are interposed in a path of lymphatics. So this diagram showing lymphatic ducts, the interstitial fluid, then the tissue cells, the lymphatic bulbs, um, the lymphatic capillaries, and the lymphatic wall. Okay, so then the initial lymphatics they coalesce to form collecting duct, then the lymph ducts. Initial lymphatics are uh, lymphatic bulbs are interconnected vessels. Specialities of these capillaries are they do not have a basal lamina under the epithelium. Junctions between endothelial cells are open. There are no fenestration in the endothelium. The tight junctions are absent. These are some of the other features. They lack vessels, they lack wall and smooth muscles in their walls. The tissue fluid enters into them through gaps or loose junctions between the endothelial cells present in their linings. Movement of the fluid in them facilitated by the contraction of the organs in which they are present, and the contraction of the arterioles and venules with which they are often associated. So they drain into the collecting lymphatics. Collecting lymphatics, they are tubular and larger lymphatics. They have walls and smooth muscles in their walls. So that is why they exhibit the peristaltic contraction that propels the lymph in a forward direction. Lymph flow is larger in lymphatics and further facilitated by the skeletal muscle smooth contraction, negative intrathoracic pressure that occurs during the inspiration that creates the suction effect. Okay, uh, and that is why the lymph flow is higher because of this suction effect. Okay, so the unidirectional flow of the lymph is maintained by presence of the walls in the larger lymphatic ducts. How the lymph is formed? The lymph is formed in the tissue fluid, therefore, it is essentially called as a modified tissue fluid. So, it is formed by the transcapillary exchange and exchange between tissue fluid and lymphatic ducts. Lymph flow is much slower than the blood. Okay. Uh, the colloidal osmotic pressure is less than that of the plasma. Presence of more lipid gives a milky color to the lymph, hence it is called as chyle. So this is the composition of the chyle. It has a proteins of concentration 2 to 6 milligram percent. It is more in case of liver. It has a lipid derived from intestinal lacteals. Okay. Then carbohydrates compared to plasma, they are less. It has a clotting factors. Okay, because lymph drains the liver, drains from the liver, so that is why it contains more amount of clotting factors. The cells mainly lymphocytes and few monocytes, ions, sodium, potassium, calcium, chloride, phosphate, and water. Functions of lymphatic circulation. Okay, so it is going to drain extra amount of fluid left in the tissue space by the capillary filtration. uh, okay, so that will be taken up by the lymphatics and returned back to the circulation. Thus lymphatics prevent accumulation of the excess free fluid in the interstitial space. Okay, so that means it is going to prevent the edema formation, and at the same time they contribute to water content of the plasma to some extent. In liver and intestine, a significant quantity of proteins enters into the interstitial space. Okay, this protein is returned to circulation via lymphatics. So this accounts almost to 25 to 50% of the circulating protein in blood. So thus lymphatics maintain protein content of the plasma. Long chain fatty acids, cholesterol, and fat soluble vitamins absorbed from the intestine and are transported to circulation via lymphatics. Mononuclear phagocytosis in lymph nodes remove bacteria and pathogenic organisms from lymph draining from the organ. So thus they play a defensive function. Okay. So coming to applied aspects, uh, decreased removal of fluid from the interstitial space may sometimes lead to edema formation. Okay, so this can occur either due to the diseases of the lymphatics like lymphangitis after surgery, that is especially after radical mastectomy that removes the lymphatic ducts, and or by infection like filariasis. Okay. The decreased lymph flow decreases the removal of excess fluid from the interstitial space tissue space that results in the edema formation. Okay. So thus formed the edema because of the lymphatic obstruction is usually non-pitting type of edema. Thank you.